American pressure on Israel, not Israel, while visiting Israel, and unacceptable to Israel, to the land of Israel. Welcome to Eyes on Israel. I'm Rabbi Pesach Woolicki. June 30th, 2024 was a momentous day in Israeli political history. Now, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but not to worry, I will explain. When the State of Israel was founded in 1948, the political leadership of the new state was dominated by the Labor Party. First known as Mapai, the Israel Workers' Party, it changed its name multiple times over the years until it finally became known simply as Labor. This secular left socialist party was affiliated with the Labor Socialist International, the international organization of socialist political parties around the world. Labor was so dominant in Israel's early years that its leader served as prime minister for the first 30 years of Israel's existence. The Labor Party, to this day, is adamantly secular and progressive in its agenda. In the early years of the state, the Labor leadership, who basically ran the country, took active steps to weaken the religious faith and observance of the recently arrived Sephardic Jewish immigrants from traditional conservative faithful communities in the Arab world and North Africa. To fully understand the dominance of the Labor Party, some background about the Israeli electoral system is in order. Israel is a multi-party system. There are literally dozens of political parties running in any given election. Israelis cast one vote only, and it's for a party. We do not vote for individual candidates. After all the votes are tallied up, the 120 Knesset seats are then divided by parties based on the percentage of votes each party received. For example, if a party received 10% of the vote, they would get 12 seats in Knesset, 10% of 120. 5% of the vote would yield 6 seats, and so on. It's not uncommon for 10 to 15 parties to make it into Knesset. Now, not every party that receives 120th of the vote makes it into the Knesset. There's a minimum threshold, which has changed over time. Currently, that threshold is 4 seats. This prevents lots of tiny parties of 1 or 2 seats from making it in, which would make coalition building much more difficult. Because of this threshold, this minimum threshold, it's quite common for smaller parties who fear that they won't make it into the Knesset to merge with each other or with larger parties for the purpose of the election, bringing their supporters with them so that they can cross the electoral threshold together. After the Knesset seats are allotted, a government is formed. For this, a majority of 61 members of Knesset, or party factions equaling 61 or more, get together and they form a coalition. In exchange for joining the coalition, control of the various departments or ministries in the government is given to the various parties in the coalition. This whole process usually takes a few weeks of intense negotiations following the election itself. The prime minister is generally the head of the largest party in the coalition unless the coalition members agree to elect someone else from their ranks. If at any point enough parties pull out of the coalition, bringing the number under 61 through a vote of no confidence, the government falls and new elections are called. So rather than having elections on a fixed schedule like the United States does, in Israel, elections happen far more frequently. In Israel's history, there has never been a single party that received a majority of the vote, resulting in the majority of the seats in the Knesset for one party. Every government in Israel's history is a coalition of various parties. In fact, it has been more than 30 years since any party has received more than 40 seats, a third of the Knesset. The largest faction in the current Knesset, for example, is Prime Minister Netanyahu's Likud party with 32. In every election from 1948 till 1977, the year that they finally lost power for the first time, the Labor Party received more than 40 seats, even breaking 50 on 2 occasions. They recovered after the 1977 loss and returned to the 40-plus seat threshold in the elections of 1981 and 84. After garnering 39 seats in 1988, they again led the way with 44 seats in 1992. That government, the labor-led coalition under Yitzhak Rabin, initiated the now infamous 1993 Oslo Accords, which, under the watchful eye of the Clinton administration, gave legitimacy as well as a governing foothold to the terrorist Palestinian Liberation Organization led by mass murderer Yasser Arafat. These negotiations and agreements, generally known as the peace process, have led to disaster for all involved. A kleptocratic terrorist regime took over the autonomous Palestinian areas. The Arabs living there saw their lives deteriorate, and almost immediately, the autonomous areas became launching pads for waves of terrorist attacks on Israelis. It's important to note at this point that the Labor Party had a constant partner in crime from the very beginning. In the early days, this party was called Mapam, Israel's Communist Party. Like Labor, Mapam was ardently secular and left-wing, separated from Labor only by being more anti-religious and even more committed to the ideals of socialism. In later years, the Communist Mapam Party morphed into a hard left progressive party called Meretz. At their peak, Meretz garnered 12 seats in 1992, the same year that Rabin was elected prime minister, making them the third largest party at the time behind Labor and Likud. The 44 Labor seats and 12 Meretz gave the left 56 seats in Knesset, almost all the way to the needed 61, and setting the stage for the disastrous Oslo peace process. It didn't take long for the Israeli people to realize what a mistake it was to allow terrorists to govern part of the land of Israel. In 1996, the first election after the Oslo Accords, Labor fell from 44 seats to 34. Meretz fell from 12 to 9. Prime Minister Netanyahu and the right-wing Likud came to power. And then in 1999, 3 years later, under the leadership of Ehud Barak, Labor fell further to 26 seats. And then in 2003, they fell again to 19, with Meretz now down to 6. After holding those numbers in 2006, 2009 saw Labor tumble to 13 seats, making them the fourth largest party, lacking any real power at all. And at that point, Meretz was down to only 3 seats, which was the minimum threshold at the time. To make an already long story short, to sum up, the Labor Party and its uber-left little brother Meretz have never recovered from the disastrous policies of appeasement of Israel's enemies. In the current Knesset, right now, Labor has a whopping total of 4 seats, the bare minimum to pass the threshold, and Meretz failed to make it into the Knesset. Let's sum this up. The Labor Party ruled the state of Israel for the first 30 years of its existence, and even after they first lost power, they were still always either the largest or second largest party until 2009. Meretz, the hard-left secularist communist progressive party that has always been at Labor's side, no longer gets enough votes to even make it into the Knesset. Israel has not had a left-wing prime minister since Ehud Barak, who was voted out of office in 2001 after his concessions to Yasser Arafat led to the Second Intifada. Now, you might fact-check me and see that secular left Yair Lapid served for a few months as prime minister in 2022, but that was an interim situation for the duration of an election campaign after the fall of the coalition and the resignation of right-wing Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Bottom line is this: Israel was founded by secular left socialists. They wanted to create a secular progressive Jewish state, but they had a problem. The Jewish people had other ideas. And as the years have passed, especially these past few decades, Israel has become a politically and socially conservative country. Israelis today are increasingly people of strong traditional faith. The stereotype you're probably familiar with in the United States is reversed in Israel. Younger Israelis tend to be more traditional, more religious, and more right-wing than their parents' or grandparents' generation. Being left-wing in Israel is associated with being old. Interesting, right? So what does all this have to do with June 30th, 2024? Why did I open by stating that this was a momentous day in Israeli political history? I mentioned earlier that it is common for small parties that fear that they will not receive enough votes to merge together into one party so they can cross the threshold to make it into the Knesset. Well, on June 30th, the Labour Party, which is currently polling right around the threshold, and Meretz, who are polling below it, merged together to form a single left-wing party. Their hope is that together they can galvanize whatever remains of the shrinking and dying left wing in Israel and make it into the Knesset. They'll probably succeed, and that's not a good thing. But it marks the official end of the Labour Party as a political entity that can stand on its own. And that is quite significant. It's also momentous because the news of the merger serves as another reminder that the Israeli left is going away, something we all should celebrate. But here's the best part. When Labour and Meretz announced their merger, they also announced the name of this newly formed political party. And you're not going to believe it. The name of the new Israeli left-wing secular progressive party is the Democrats. I kid you not. Could it be any better than that? Folks, the Israeli left that is undermining Israeli nationalism and Israeli sovereignty and is in bed with the left-wing Democratic Party in America trying to topple the Netanyahu government has pulled off the mask, and they've named themselves the same name as the party they look to as an example. The new Israeli party is the Democrats. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Since October 7th, over 600 brave IDF soldiers have given their lives to defend Israel from the evil forces of Hamas and Hezbollah. Their families are devastated, their wives are now widows, and their children are orphans. Think of Hadass Lowenstern, who's been on this show, whose husband Elisha was killed in battle, leaving her to raise their 6 children under the age of 13, including a baby, all alone. Or Neora Swede, whose husband Bechor died while heroically fighting terrorists with his bare hands near Gaza. Neora must now raise their 3 beautiful young daughters on her own. These IDF widows have lost everything. As they grieve for their husbands, they're also scrambling to make ends meet without their family's main provider. We cannot abandon them. Their husbands died to protect Israel and the free world from terror. Now we must protect their families who sacrifice so much. Every dollar raised pays for critical expenses like food, utilities, and clothing. Please give generously at idfwidows.com for the heroic widows and orphans of the fallen soldiers of the IDF. That's idfwidows.com. On July 24th, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is scheduled to address a joint session of Congress. The invitation to Netanyahu, originally extended by House Speaker Mike Johnson, was then supported by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. The appearance of Netanyahu before Congress comes at a highly charged political moment, with many Democratic members already pledging to boycott the speech in protest of how Prime Minister Netanyahu is prosecuting the war against Hamas. But not everyone in Israel is happy about Netanyahu's upcoming visit to Washington. On June 26, the New York Times ran an opinion piece co-authored by 6 prominent left-wing Israeli public figures. The biggest name on the list was Ehud Barak, who served a short stint as prime minister from 1999 to 2001. More on him in a moment. The piece in the Times calls the invitation to Netanyahu, quote, a terrible mistake. The authors go on to say that, quote, inviting Mr. Netanyahu will reward his contempt for U.S. efforts to establish a peace plan, allow more aid to the beleaguered people of Gaza, and do a better job of sparing civilians, end quote. In other words, these prominent Israeli leftists repeat the claims that there is not enough humanitarian aid entering Gaza and that the IDF operations have caused excessive civilian deaths, both of which are lies, as we've discussed many times on this program. But the richest line of the piece is this, quote, time and again, He has rejected President Biden's plan to remove Hamas from power in Gaza through the establishment of a peacekeeping force. What? These prominent Israeli figures are actually calling for a foreign military presence, maybe from the UN, maybe from the US, to act as a peacekeeping force in Gaza? And they blame Netanyahu, who's adamant about the need to completely destroy Hamas, for rejecting Biden's plans to remove Hamas from power? Biden, who has repeatedly tried to get Israel to end the war before this goal is accomplished? The truly amazing thing about this opinion piece is that former Prime Minister Ehud Barak is one of the authors. If there's one thing that Israelis associate Ehud Barak with, it's failed security policies. During his short term as prime minister, he withdrew the Israeli army from a security zone that it had established in southern Lebanon. This security zone kept Hezbollah at a manageable distance from the northern border of Israel. The rushed withdrawal abandoned the Christian South Lebanese army, who were then massacred by Hezbollah. It also led directly to the Second Lebanon War between Israel and Hezbollah in 2006 and created the situation we are in now, with Hezbollah bombarding northern Israeli towns on a daily basis. As prime minister in 2000, Ehud Barak offered the Palestinian Authority, led by Yasser Arafat, a Palestinian state on 92% of Judea and Samaria, as well as, according to documents declassified just last year, Palestinian control over parts of the city of Jerusalem. And just like the withdrawal from South Lebanon, this offer was understood by Israel's enemies as a sign of weakness. Arafat rejected the proposal and launched the Second Intifada, a wave of terror attacks that murdered over 600 Israelis and injured close to 5,000. After getting trounced by Netanyahu in a landslide in 2001, Ehud Barak left politics, only to attempt a number of failed comebacks, most recently in the election of 2019, when his party failed to make it into the Knesset. Let's just say that he's not very popular. There's far more to the failures and fecklessness of Ehud Barak, but suffice it to say, he's not someone who the Israeli people look to for wisdom on matters of national security. Joining me now is member of Knesset Ohad Tal of the Religious Zionism Party. Member of Knesset Tal, welcome back to Eyes on Israel.
Shalom, Rav Pesach. Thank you very much for having me.
So, member of Knesset Tal, it's debatable whether Prime Minister Netanyahu should be making this speech in Congress. There's a lot of things that could go wrong, especially in this volatile moment in American politics, as well as what's going on in Israel. But the arguments made by these leftists, led by Ehud Barak and the New York Times, as I pointed out, really don't represent the Israeli people. You wrote a piece just last week in the New York Sun making exactly that case. Lay it out for us.
You're right, 100% of Pesach. First of all, this group of leftists are, as you mentioned, are a group of people who tried time and time again to convince the public in Israel that they are right. And time again, they were failed. So now to come and say that Prime Minister Netanyahu was democratically elected to be the Prime Minister of Israel so many times, that gets so much support from the public, that he's not representing Israel, that's a complete false. But, just to talk about what is the main point. I mean, they're trying to say that Netanyahu is rejecting Biden's plan to end the war, to go to a ceasefire, and to bring some kind of forces to maintain the peace, which, what they really mean is that what they want to see is the return of the Palestinian Authority. This is what they really mean that they want to see. They want to see the Palestinian Authority goes back to control Gaza. So one thing they are right. Prime Minister Netanyahu rejected these kind of ideas. Yes, we are not interested seeing the Palestinian Authority goes back to control Gaza. We are not interested seeing a ceasefire without achieving the goals of the war. And I think, all the polls are supporting that the vast majority of the people in Israel support these stands of Prime Minister Netanyahu.
So, member of Knesset Tal, when you look at the political landscape, we just had this event that took place, and I just spoke about it in the previous segment on the show, that the Labor Party, the traditional ruling party for the first 30 years of Israel existence almost doesn't exist anymore, and they merged with the Meretz party, that had the other extreme left-wing party, in an effort to stay alive politically. And I think a lot of people outside of Israel don't understand that the Israeli public has shifted to the right, and people like Ehud Barak don't represent us anymore. What are you hoping to see out of Prime Minister Netanyahu's visit, and what can you add to what I just said about where the Israeli public are politically?
You know, I think that if you look at what is happening, not just in Israel, by the way, it's happening all across the world. If you would see what is happening now in these days in Europe, what is happening now in France, for example, the left, many times, they feel that they are the majority. The natural course of history for them is that they in control. That, I mean, they always talks about democracy and they always promote democracy, but as long as they in control, the second they lose control, no more democracy. They would go and burn out the streets. This is what is happening now in France. This is what is happening also here in Israel. Unfortunately, yes, you're right. The public in Israel are shifting. More and more are becoming turning more to the right. And we're seeing the left losing it. They're burning the streets here in Israel and so many other places in the world. They try to take control not through the polls, but through using their, taking control of all kind of places here in it's what we call the deep state, and calling the shots through there without the need to go through the public and convince them. In your opinion. So yes, this is what is happening, unfortunately, right here in Israel. I mean, we've just seen yesterday, for example, the release of so many terrorists back into Gaza without getting the support for that from the government or from the prime minister or even from the minister of defense. I think it was a week and a half ago that the army declared a humanitarian ceasefire for I think it was 12 or 24 hours in Gaza without getting a permission from the government. This is something which is beyond, it doesn't make any sense, unfortunately. It's craziness. But we are seeing that that's the reality. We have to fight it. We have to change that. We have to take back control. The government has to take back the control. And on that sense, I think it's important for Prime Minister Netanyahu to go, especially now, because as you've said at the beginning, Israel is now fighting for its existence. We are fighting again, not just against Hamas or Hezbollah. We are fighting against the evil plan of Iran that was built for 20 years to destroy Israel. This is what we are fighting against. And on those moments, yes, we need to go, the Prime Minister of Israel needs to go to the Congress to speak to the American people, to bring our closest ally to be closer to us, to realize the threat, which is, by the way, it's a threat against America just as much as, even more than it's a threat against Israel. Just one last story before I'll pass it back on to you. Sheikh Raed Salah, the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood in Israel, said a couple of weeks ago, he was asked, what's going to happen on the next day in Gaza? And he said, that's the wrong question. The real question is, what's going to happen on the next day in America? We want to take down America. They see us just as the forefront of this war. So yes, it's important for Prime Minister of Israel to go to the Congress, to speak to the American people, to explain that to them, and to strengthen the alliance between Israel and America.
All right, Member of Knesset Tal, we're out of time. Looking forward to having you back very soon.
Thank you so much.
Welcome back. Israel's brave soldiers risk everything to defend God's people and the free world. Many have paid a terrible price, coming home with devastating injuries that have changed their lives forever. Lieutenant Colonel Maayan Mullah was in Gaza fighting Hamas. He was ambushed and struck by over 140 pieces of shrapnel throughout his body. Maayan has already endured 7 surgeries and is now permanently disabled, unable to work or be with his wife and young children as he rehabilitates. Or think about Sa'ar Axelrod, a young father, gravely wounded by a Hezbollah rocket, which left him with a skull fracture, brain injury, and broken bones. He is also hospitalized, unable to return home to his pregnant wife and their 10-month-old son that he may never be able to pick up again. These heroic soldiers sacrificed everything to protect our freedom. Now they need our help to support their families as they recover. The financial burden they face is unimaginable. Please give generously at IsraelDefenders.com to provide critical assistance for food, housing, childcare, and more. Go to IsraelDefenders.com and help the wounded warriors who sacrificed everything for us. A few weeks ago, Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry signed a law requiring that the Ten Commandments be hung in every public classroom in the state. Almost immediately, the progressive Jewish establishment organizations expressed their deep concern, and now 3 Jewish families have joined a group that has filed a suit in federal court challenging the new Louisiana law. Sadly, the progressive Jewish establishment has long been at the forefront of the fight against the Ten Commandments. In 2005, it was Jewish community organizations that argued before the U.S. Supreme Court that public displays of the Ten Commandments undermine religious freedom and the pluralistic nature of American society. The case at the time was McCreary County versus American Civil Liberties Union, in which the Supreme Court held 5-4 that the Ten Commandment displays in 2 Kentucky county courthouses violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. The Anti-Defamation League, the American Jewish Congress, the Union for Reform Judaism, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, and the American Jewish Committee all supplied amicus briefs opposing displays of the Ten Commandments. In Exodus chapter 19, the chapter right before the Ten Commandments, the preamble as it were, God tells the Jewish people what the covenant of the law is all about. And in it, he says, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." The Hebrew word for priest here is kohen. It describes a person whose job is to help others, the flock, in drawing closer to God. That's the role of a priest. When God called the nation of Israel to be a kingdom of priests, he didn't mean that every Jew is supposed to be a rabbi or a temple priest. He meant that the Jewish people as a whole have a priestly role and mission in the world. The mission of Israel is to bring God, his words, his values, his truth to the world. And then God spoke the Ten Commandments. My point is that the Ten Commandments hanging on the wall of every classroom in America should be the goal of the Jewish people, the highest expression of the realization of the original mission to teach the Ten Commandments, given to the Jews at Sinai, to all of humanity. Posting the Ten Commandments in classrooms all across America ought to be applauded and promoted by the Jewish community, not fought. Louisiana State Representative Michael Boehm, who co-authored the new law, defended the bill in an interview with the Washington Post, saying, quote, "The Ten Commandments is about civilization and right and wrong. It does not say you have to be this particular faith or that particular faith." Representative Boehm is absolutely right, and it's high time that Jews woke up and realized what is plain for all to see. The decline of Christian faith in America that we've seen over the past half century is bad for Jews. A more Christian, more biblically faithful America is a better America, better for Jews and better for the world. At the ceremonial signing of the bill, Governor Landry stated, quote, "If you want to respect the rule of law, you've got to start with the original lawgiver, which was Moses." Right now in America, the biblical underpinnings of Western civilization are under attack by those who despise and deny the truths of the Bible. And lo and behold, these same progressives who hate the Bible also happen to hate Israel. The rising anti-Semitism in America today is the result of not enough biblical faith, not too much of it. Folks, we're in the midst of a spiritual war. We all know that. It couldn't be more clear. And in that war, all people of biblical faith, Jews and Christians, must stand together and promote more of God's word in the education of American children. Joining me now is Rabbi Yaakov Menken of the Coalition for Jewish Values, a coalition of over 1,500 Orthodox rabbis nationwide who have been working hard to reclaim the Jewish brand, as it were, to fight against the progressive, woke Jewish establishment and really bring a voice of truth and reason to this whole conversation. Rabbi Menken, What do we do about these Jews who are opposing the Ten Commandments in Louisiana classrooms? Help us understand what's going on.
Well, thank you for having me back. And the problem that they have is that they really don't even have a coherent argument for why they oppose it. Because if you look at what they're saying, well, they're adopting one particular text of the Ten Commandments. And we know that's foolishness because last time I checked, the text in Exodus and the text in Deuteronomy have minor textual differences, which we have very good explanations for, and none of which create a situation where one version contradicts the other. They're avoiding everything. If they really wanted to go at this from a Jewish angle, they would point out, well, we're all into commandments. There are not 10 commandments in the 10 commandments. There's actually 14. But they are so unfamiliar with their own Jewish teachings that they didn't come with that argument because they didn't think of it. They only know of the 10 commandments, which, if you take the direct translation of the Hebrew, it's the 10 statements. Because, again, there are actually 14 commandments. So what's the problem? Their opposition is to the founding fathers and what America put together. The same thing, I learned very recently that if you stand at the speaker's dais in the House of Representatives and look up, what you are looking at is a relief of Moses, a depiction of Moses. It's that same basic principle, that same idea that the founding fathers looked into the Hebrew Bible in particular and the 5 books of Moses to come out with the values that they wanted to put in place for this great country. That's a historical reality. That has nothing to do with what religion you are. To recognize the 10 Commandments is to recognize, like the governor said, the role that the founding fathers placed of the original law and the original lawgiver in creating this great society.
So why do these Jews, progressive Jews, who are very much aware of the rising anti-Semitism from the left, why do they see greater expressions of biblical faith in America as a threat?
The Jewish left is great at fighting the last century's battles. If you look at the left in Germany, they imagined that enlightened Germans could never duplicate the hatred of the Jews that used to be done in Europe in the name of religion. And there was indeed a horrible history of hate of the Jews done in the name of religion. Well, guess what? That wasn't the problem in Germany. They decided it was about race. It's not about race anymore. You're not allowed to be bigoted against races or ethnicities. Heaven forbid you should do a microaggression today. Oh my goodness. So they've come up with a new excuse. We only hate the Jewish homeland. We only hate the ideas that Jews have self-determination. And the progressives going right along with it.
We have Jews who, in the name of Judaism, are opposing the Ten Commandments. And as I said in my tee-up, we want America to be a place with more biblical values, with more biblical literacy, but these Jews are opposed to it. Now, talk a little bit, we have about 2.5 minutes left. I had you on because the Coalition for Jewish Values was created really to fight exactly these battles. Talk a little bit about the Coalition for Jewish Values. Remind our viewers from last time you were on about what you were created for and why this particular battle really represents your mission.
Well, I really liked the way you put it when you said we're trying to reclaim the Jewish narrative. The existence of our organization really is because of the Jewish left and them saying everything possible to present the abandonment of Judaism and Jewish values as if it were the Jewish view and the view of Judaism. No, none of us gets to speak for what Judaism believes and what Judaism stands for. If we want to know what Judaism believes and stands for, we learn certain books. We learn books written hundreds of years ago that we don't have a say in really, and that's really the truth. We don't have a say in what Judaism believes and stands for when it's already been dictated to us. We know what it is. The lawgiver was given to us by one whose laws cannot be changed and cannot be adjusted. So this idea that Judaism believes there's more than 2 genders, no. It's right there in the book of Genesis. The idea that Jews believe that a fetus in the womb is just a clump of cells. There's verses in the Bible about Rebecca and about Jeremiah that talk about that. No, that's not true. And by the way, what progressives are saying about Israel and about the Jews of Israel conforms to all the classic beliefs of anti-Semites with which these Jewish leftists are entirely unfamiliar. If they knew the least thing, they would know that certain on the progressive left are literally paraphrasing Mein Kampf while claiming to be speaking only about Israel.
Rabbi Menken, we have about 15 seconds left. Let our viewers know where they can follow your work and follow the work of the Coalition for Jewish Values.
Well, it's cjvalues.org. We'll bring you to our website. For those who like typing, coalitionforjewishvalues.org. And we're also CJ Values on all your favorite social media, where I am Y Menken, especially on X/Twitter. I look forward to hearing from all your readers and listeners.
Thank you, Rabbi Menken. We'll be right back with more Eyes on Israel in a few moments.
Against all odds, God restored Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria back to the nation of Israel during the War of 1967. Lost to Israel for thousands of years, this region contains the lifeblood and heartbeat of the Jewish people. Yet, the struggle has not been easy. Propaganda, terrorism, and international pressure have been the constant companion of the courageous men and women who have dared to call this place home. I'm Julie Cerrone, and these are the stories of Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, Israel's biblical heartland. God's land. Yishai, tell us about Hebron today. Why is it so significant?
Hebron's a really ancient town. It's 4,500 years old, and Abraham came here 3,800 years ago. 3,800 years, everybody's got to pause and think about that, okay? 3,800 years, just try to compare that to any place in America that's like 300 years old. So 3,800 years old is a lot. And so Abraham came to this town, and he lived here. He actually lived in that hilltop over there. But this, where we're sitting right now, is where the main story of Hebron took place. But he lived just outside of the others. But he would come here, and he came here, and he actually negotiated for a plot of land that would become the sepulcher of the ancestors, the tombs of the forefathers and mothers. And he buried his beloved wife, Sarah. He eulogizes her, he cries for her. And then he's buried here by his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, the father of the Jews, the father of the Arabs. They come together to bury their shared father. And then Isaac and Rebekah are buried here. And finally, Leah is buried here, Leah. And then Jacob is dying in Egypt. And he asks his children, he says, don't bury me outside of the land of Israel. Don't bury me in Egypt. Take me back to Hebron. Later on, King David is going to rule here because this belongs to the tribe of Judah. From then on, it becomes this important city where it has the forefathers and mothers. And then there's the Herodian structure. That's atop of the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs, a massive structure which is extant to this very day the way it was built. You have no other structure like that, maybe in the world. In Judaism, it's second to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where you meet God. Hebron is where you meet the followers who went in the footsteps of Abraham, who searched and found God. And we are at the forefront of trying to create a different consciousness in Israel, to hold on to this land, to push back on Palestine as an alternative narrative to Israel, to push back on jihadism as something that wants to destroy Israel, and to replace the replacement of Israel with Israel. I think, Julie, that you could attest yourself that when you come here, you're touching something very raw, very biblical. We're sitting here surrounded by these olive trees. They themselves are these ancient olive trees that are just, they have so much to tell us. There's a water source nearby, which is the ancient water source. So you come here and you can really touch it. You can really, really touch it. And it's off the beaten path. You have to demand your tour guide takes you there. But when you do, people come here and they're like, I really touched the Bible. I really touched the story of Abraham. And this is the heartland of the Holy Land.
Hebron is home to the Jewish matriarchs and patriarchs of the Bible. It is also one of 3 cities mentioned in the Bible that have a biblical deed to the land. Sadly, it's still a very contested city to this day. Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria are not occupied territories. They're not even part of the West Bank. They are biblical heartland of Israel, God's land. If you would like more information about the people and places of Judea and Samaria, please visit www.keepgodsland.com.
Welcome back. I'm here in the Eyes on Israel studio with Rabbi Elie Mischel, my dear colleague and friend, who's also the Director of Education here at Israel 365. And he has just written a brand new book called The War Against the Bible, Ishmael, Esau, and Israel at the End Times. Rabbi Mischel, welcome to Eyes on Israel.
Thanks so much for having me.
So that's the name of the book. Ishmael, Esau, and Israel at the End Times. Is this just a book of biblical analysis? Is this a book of current events? What exactly are we talking about in this book, The War Against the Bible?
Well, it's all of those things. The Bible is not just a historical book that tells us stories from long ago. The Bible is an eternal book, which is relevant for all times. And it's not just the prophecies that are meant for the future, but rather even the stories, like the stories of Samuel and Moses, all of these are eternally relevant, and they speak to what's happening today. So this book is really about the major players at the end times, the people of Israel, who are really the people of the book, and I would include together with the people of Israel, in this sense, Christians as well, because Jews and Christians together believe in the Bible. And the two great enemies today that we're facing are Ishmael and Esau. Who they are, that gets a little complex, right? Who are Ishmael and Esau today? But these are the major players at the end times, and it's clear throughout the Bible and through all the prophecies that this is what's going to happen at the end time.
You know, I'm fond of telling people, you know, when they say they believe in the Bible, people say, oh yeah, of course I believe in the Bible. Every word of the Bible is true. So I'll point out to them, you know, the Bible doesn't only have stories about the past, the Bible also has stories about the future. And specifically now in the war that we're fighting and the way things are with the people of Israel having returned to our land after thousands of years, and now we get attacked by these anti-biblical forces in the world, we really do need to read the Bible not as a metaphor for, you know, a Saturday or Sunday morning sermon, but really as laying out the blueprint for what we're seeing here. So you mentioned that our two enemies today are Ishmael and Esau. Explain what you mean by that. I understand that Ishmael is the Muslims, is the Arab world who's attacking not only Israel, but Western civilization. But what do you mean by Esau?
So that's a fascinating question, and one of the most important questions that I bring up here in the book. You know, Esau as a people, they're also known as the Edomites, right? Because Edom means red, right? And he had his red soup that he got from Jacob. The Edomites as a people disappeared a few thousand years ago, just before the Roman era in the land of Israel. So who are they? The sages of Israel identify them as the Roman Empire, which is fascinating. What's the connection between the Roman Empire and Edom and Esau? What they share in common is really something very fundamental. Just as Esau rejected God, right, and that's why he was willing to sell the birthright to Jacob for a bowl of soup, right? He rejected God and turned against God and rebelled. So too does the Roman Empire, right? The Roman Empire, King Titus, you know, the Emperor Titus, when he comes and he destroys the temple, right? The sages tell us that he called out that I've destroyed the God of Israel. I've killed him and I made myself a God, right? This pagan anti-God rebellion against God, that what we find in Esau, we find in the Roman Empire as well. But the great question is, now that the Roman Empire no longer exists, so who is Esau today? Who is Edom? Right? The book of Obadiah and many of the other prophecies are all about Edom and Esau in the future. So who is it, right? The Romans don't exist. The Edomites themselves as a nation no longer exist. So who is it? And I believe that it's quite clear that at the end times, we're talking here about the anti-God, secular, woke progressives, the people who reject the Bible, right? This war against the Bible that the Edomites are waging, right? This is the war of the secular progressives today.
It's interesting. And they're also, like the Romans, have this desire for world hegemony and the rule of man. And that's really a denial of God's dominion over the world. So these kind of globalist, heathen, neo-pagan progressives, that's Esau, together with Ishmael, what we call now the red-green alliance between the Marxists and the Islamists. What you're saying is that that's really laid out in the verses of the Bible.
Exactly. And it says it in Psalm 83. It talks about the tents of Ishmael and Edom and how they will turn against the people of Israel, and in that way also turn against God. The war against Israel, the war against God are one and the same. But what's fascinating here is a question that many, many people have asked, which is, how are these two enemies coming together? How is it possible that secular woke progressives are coming together with Islamic jihadists? I mean, what do they share in common? The woke progressives don't believe in God. They've rejected God. And these Muslims, these extreme Muslims, obviously do believe in God. So what do they share in common? And that really is the basis of this book, which is, many people have asked this question, but people are not answering it biblically. Biblically, what they share in common is that they both hate the Bible. Right? The people of Ishmael, the Muslims, believe in God, but they never accepted the Bible. Right? They reject the Bible. Jews and Christians believe in the Bible, but not Muslims. And so what they have is a belief in God, which is wild. Right? This is how you can have Hamas terrorists on October 7th raping Jewish women and murdering babies in the name of Allah, right? When you have belief in God, right? They come from Abraham. Ishmael is the son of Abraham, but without Sarah, who represents the Bible. If you just have Abraham and no Sarah, if you have belief in God and no Bible, you have a belief in God that's wild, and really whatever you want, whatever you desire becomes God's will. You can just say that it's God's will. And so that's incredibly dangerous to believe in God without the Bible. So that's Ishmael. They hate the Bible because the Bible tells us that it was Isaac that was chosen and not Ishmael. And at the same time, on the left, the people of Esau, of the Edomites, the modern Edomites, the secular woke progressives of today, they also hate the Bible because the Bible stands in the way of their conquering of the world. The Judeo-Christian values that the Bible represents, that is what's standing in their way from taking over America and the rest of the West.
So what you've really done in this book is given us a way to kind of pull back the camera and look at the headlines and look at what we're dealing with in the spiritual warfare that we are all fighting across the world. Israel's on the kinetic front lines of it, but what's happening on American college campuses and in the media and in Europe is also a front in this same spiritual war. You really brought it back to the prophecies in the Bible and shown how what we're living through today is that end time moment.
Yeah, there is no separation. You and I are fond of talking about how there's no separation between politics and the Bible, right? The Bible is about politics. Politics is life. Politics is our future as a society. And the Bible is not just a beautiful old book that we keep on the side, right? The Bible guides us every step of the way, even today.
All right, so the book is The War Against the Bible, Ishmael, Esau, and Israel at the End Times. You can get it at the link that you will see on your screen. Thank you, Rabbi Elie Mischel, for joining us here on Eyes on Israel.